Episode of Realistically. Today we have the legendary Carl Za with us, who is a podcaster. He also has a YouTube show, and he does frequent appearances on various other channels. Welcome, Carl. How are you doing?
Hi, Esha. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm about to head out to Donetsk, and so thank you for joining us with such short notice.
Wow. What are you gonna do in Donetsk?
Well, they're actually doing a documentary film about me.
Wow. Okay. I mean, I now I'm interested. That piqued my interest. When is the film coming out? When can
I
we
don't
learn the
know. We're
story of
going to
Isha?
Donetsk this week to film it. It's about foreign journalists who've been to Donetsk. They've already done one about Johnny Miller from Press TV.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you know as soon as I know.
All right.
So, so let's just get straight to the topic. What I've noted, so last week Anthony Blinken came to China, and it was a very strange reception. Did you hear Xi asking him, when is he leaving? Not asking him, but asking somebody, when is he leaving?
Yeah, I saw that audio clip. Xi Jinping was asking his aide, so when are they leaving? And the aide said tonight, and Xi Jinping said, tonight, and basically like not okay, good. and then they met, and Xi Jinping was like, okay. I mean, the body language of Xi Jinping is like, okay, let's get this over with. But because Blinken, even prior coming to China, he gave a talk at G7 meeting in Italy, and he was accusing China of basically aiding Russia's war effort in Ukraine by having a normal trade relationship. He accuses China of, and after his meeting of Xi Jinping, he made the same speech. He said, China is supplying Russia with machine tools and semiconductors, which is aiding Russia's war effort. This is outrageous because it's United States currently having a semiconductor sanction against China, and yet U.S. is blaming China for supplying Russia with semiconductor that China produces. I mean, it boggles the mind. You know, normal diplomacy, you would expect a give and take. You know, if China is not going to abandon Russia, but let's say U.S. want to entice China to work with the U.S. on Russia. You would think U.S. will at least throw a couple of carrots, you know, like some enticement. Okay, hey, here, work with us. Here, we can make some concessions. No, instead, Anthony Blinken threatened China with financial sanctions if China continues to have the normal trade relationship with Russia. That's outrageous. I mean, Chinese Foreign Ministry said as much. It says China is neither originator nor a party to the Ukraine conflict. We have a normal trade relationship with Russia, and this is China's legitimate right. It should not be suppressed. But I don't even understand why Blinken went to China in the first place.
Well, what interested me is after Lincoln's trip, a U.S. general who is in charge of Pacificom, that's like the whole U.S. Navy bases along the Pacific, like Guam and maybe even Philippines, mentioned something about China trying to expand into the South China Sea territory and increased aggressiveness, which seems outrageous. Can you talk about the brewing? This has been going on for a while where the U.S. has been doing drills along that coast. What's going on? Why are they doing it?
Okay, so the South China Sea dispute is actually a long-standing dispute, but it's only started heating up like in the last year. During the time when Duterte was the Filipino president, China actually had a gentleman's agreement with the Philippines on how to resolve the issue. It was mostly calm. Duterte enjoyed a friendly relationship with China during his presidency. But when the Bongbong Marcos came to power, initially Bongbong Marcos claimed he will follow Duterte's legacy. He actually traveled to China, got a red carpet reception, and then Bongbong Marcos followed up by making a trip to Washington. I guess this is where Joe Biden made him an offer he couldn't refuse. So Philippines suddenly had a 180 degrees shift in this relationship with China. Now the Philippines is opening more military bases to host U.S. military. Now under the new agreement, U.S. have access to 9 Filipino bases all throughout Philippines, both facing South China Sea and facing Taiwan. And they're conducting the largest joint exercises in the Philippines recently. And it's clearly aimed toward China. They even sink the latest naval exercise. They chose a made in China ship. So it was a made in China oil tanker that was converted into a Filipino Navy supply ship. But they chose it specifically to be the target ship. And when the news media reported, it reported as they chose a Chinese target ship, quote unquote Chinese target ship. It's basically an act of provocation. The dispute itself dates to the dispute between the Philippines and China over South China Sea. That actually dates to the 1970s. China had claimed the Spratly Islands and Paracel Islands after World War II. Well, I mean, China had the claim on those islands before World War II, but during World War II, all the islands in South China Sea were taken over by Japan, and the Japanese, according to the terms of Japanese surrender, Japanese were to give up all the territory has taken, including Taiwan, including islands in the South China Sea. But the final settlement that was to settle all the claim was to be the Treaty of San Francisco in 1951. But United States explicitly excluded China and Korea from the Treaty of San Francisco under the excuse that China and Korea are both in a state of civil war, unresolved civil war. So they were, this 1951, that's when the Korean War was still going on. China and U.S. fought on the opposite side. So China and Korea were excluded from the settlement with post-war settlement with Japan from the Treaty of San Francisco. So Japan gave up all its claims, but it wasn't officially handed to China in the Treaty of San Francisco. But because the Chiang Kai-shek's government on Taiwan, they maintained a diplomatic tie with Japan at that point. So they signed a separate treaty in the 1950s, 1956, I believe, that Japan hand over Taiwan islands in the South China Sea to the government on Taiwan. So basically the claim of mainland China and Taiwan on South China Sea is one and the same. In fact, in the 1946, immediately after World War II, the nationalist government sent warship to put boundary markers on those islands. And at that time, the United States had no objection because Chiang Kai-shek was a U.S. ally. And this is when, in 1946, the Republic of China published a map with the 11 dashed line, which they drew around the South China Sea, marking out the claim line. And the People's Republic, after the communist victory, they inherited the 11 dashed line, but then they removed two of the 11 lines, the two of the line that goes through the Gulf of Tonkin with Vietnam in a separate, because China and Vietnam has a separate maritime negotiation regarding the boundary in the Gulf of Tonkin. So that 2 line was taken out. So the 11 dash line became 9 dash line. And this is what U.S. is now objecting to. Prior, U.S. said it takes no position. If you look at all the U.S. official document, I just found one in this called the U.S. Congress Presser, which is it's a publication by it's a branch of United States government that provides information to congressmen in U.S. Congress. What it says is United States holds no position toward the territorial dispute in the South China Sea, right? That's the U.S. official position. But in actuality, Blinken was in the Philippines just last month, and he said the U.S. has an ironclad commitment to the U.S.-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty, which includes South China Sea. Now, this is actually expansion on the original treaty signed in 1950s because, for people who don't know this history, U.S. acquired Philippines as a colony from Spain as a
Yep,
result
after
of
the Spanish-American War.
Spanish-American War. And when Spain transferred sovereignty of Philippines to United States, two sides signed 1898 Treaty of Paris, which clearly defined what the boundary of the Philippines was, which did not include the Spratly Islands in the South China Sea. And when U.S. and Philippines, they signed the U.S.-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty in 1951, that treaty is which bound U.S. to defend the Filipino territory as defined by the Treaty of Paris of 1898, which did not include the islands in the South China Sea. What happened was, as a result of the Chinese Civil War, when the Communist Army took over the Hainan Island, the largest Chinese island in South China Sea in 1950, the nationalist government on Taiwan, they felt, okay, now it's pointless to leave the garrisons on the South China Sea islands when the Hainan Island was taken. Like all the garrisons are now became isolated on these small islands in South China Sea. So they withdrew to Taiwan. And then in 1950, a Filipino businessman, he claimed to have discovered the islands in the South China Sea. Yes, he claimed he had discovered the Spratly Islands, and he actually wanted to make it his own little country. He wanted to declare his own little country that includes all these islands. But the Filipino government did not take a position until 1970s. That's when they supposedly bought the rights from this Filipino businessman who have claimed he discovered all these islands. And that's when...
That was Bang Bang's dad, right?
That was Bang Bang's dad, Marcos Sr., Ferdinand Marcos, the famous Filipino dictator. So in the 19th, after this Filipino businessman claimed to have discovered Spratly Islands, then both mainland China and Taiwan, they realized, okay, they have left a power vacuum. So they actually sent troops to garrison two of the largest islands. So for mainland China, they garrisoned the Woody Island in the Paracel Islands. And for the Taiwan military, they garrisoned Ituaba, or what they call in Chinese, Taiping Island. So these two islands are the largest natural form islands that has fresh water source. But start from 1970s, there's kind of scrambling for the different claims. So the Philippines, they send their own military to grab couple of reefs and couple islets, and then in 1999, the government of the Philippines sent a World War II era ship they inherited from the United States. It's called Sierra Madre. Sierra Madre was a World War II era U.S. Navy ship that was handed over to South Vietnam, and after South Vietnam was overthrown, the ship was transferred to the Philippines. And so the Filipino government in 1999, in order to grab a little piece of more territory, they ran Sierra Madre to on ground, and one of the second Thomas Shaw. Second Thomas Shaw is a reef which submerged under high tide. So they sunk the ship there just to claim. China was not very happy. Obviously, China lodged a diplomatic protest, and the Filipino president then, the President Estrada, in his response to China's complaint, he said, well, we had our ship suffer a mechanical failure, and we promised we're going to tow the ship away when, at the latest opportunity. Well, 25 years later, that ship is still there, And Philippine government actually stationed a dozen Filipino Marines on that ship. So now it became and they send regular supplies to the abandoned ship to supply the marine space there, and the supply ship engaged in sort of a cat and mouse game with the Chinese Coast Guard, who are sent there to chase them away. Then in 2014, this is when Duterte was Filipino president. He had a gentleman's agreement with China, where China agreed they will allow the supply ships to come to the stranded Sierra Madre to supply the Marines stranded there, as long as Filipino side promised they will not bring building materials to Second Thomas Shaw, and so this is why throughout Duterte's presidency there's very little dispute around South China Sea, but after Bongbong Marcos' trips to Washington, now not only they double the effort to send supply ships, now they're sending building material to Sierra Madre, because after 25 years, the ship Sierra Madre is falling apart. And so they're trying to send building materials to reinforce Sierra Madre, the structure. And this is what China has explicitly said they would not allow. And so this is why there's a standoff between the Chinese Coast Guard and the Filipino Navy supply ships that trying to bring building material to Sierra Madre. And the two sides are engaging water cannon fights. So the United States want to get in the middle of this dispute. But I don't know.
Let me just read out what Admiral John Aquilino said of Beijing's strategy to Financial Times as a boiling frog tactic, or gradually step up aggression so that other nations don't immediately realize when a critical point in the conflict is realized. And then he said there needs to be a continual description of China's bad behavior that is outside legal international norms, and that story has to be told by all the nations in the region. Aquilino, who led U.S. forces in the Indo-Pacific for 3 years, cited two major conflict points involving China: Taiwan and the Second Thomas Shoal.
Yeah, so the Second Thomas Shaw is the current hot point of contention in South China Sea. But right now, we're talking about Chinese Coast Guard ship and Filipino supply ships and engaging a water cannon fight. So what is the U.S. going to do? U.S. is complaining because this is not a military conflict. So is U.S. Navy going to bring a gun to the water cannon fight? I mean, that would be a serious escalation. So this is why now you're going to, if you Google, you can see articles. They talk about how U.S. Coast Guard have a role to play in South China Sea. I don't know what U.S. Coast Guard.
From the U.S. coast.
Yeah, U.S. Coast Guard. They're talking about sending U.S. Coast Guard to South China Sea. I don't know what are they going to do. Are they going to engage in water cannon fights against the Chinese Coast Guard? I mean, like that would be something to see. But that's Chinese Coast Guard right now. They have larger ships, so I don't think they can even win a water cannon fight. And this is what U.S. military, the Pacificom, is complaining about, because China is not escalating this into a full military confrontation, which would justify U.S. intervention under the guise of U.S.-Filipino Mutual Defense Treaty. So this is what they call China's gray zone aggression. The salami slicing, and again, this didn't have to be this way for the almost entirety of Duterte's presidency. Under the gentleman agreement signed in 2014, Filipino Navy were able to sending supply ships to Second Thomas Shaw to Sierra Madre without interdiction by the Chinese Coast Guard, because Filipino side promised they would not bring building material to reinforce Sierra Madre. And even though 25 years ago, Filipino government promised they would have towed the ship away. That never happened. And then now this is a perfect opportunity for US to ramp up anti-China propaganda. So what they do is they send these Western journalists and Filipino journalists on the supply boats of the Filipino Navy, and they fly on the surveillance planes of U.S. Navy. They get really close. Now you can see the shot of from every angle, basically, of the Chinese Coast Guard spraying water cannon on Filipino ships. And this is an example of Chinese aggression in South China Sea that necessitate deployment of U.S. forces into the Philippines.
So one question, what exactly happened in the meeting in Washington between Bongbong Marcos and the U.S. administration that made him reverse his policy?
That's a good question. But what we do know is the Marcos Sr., Ferdinand Marcos, he had about $300 billion worth of ill-gotten gain, the corrupt money that was stashed in the offshore bank account that U.S. government had froze. So if Bongbong Marcos were ever want to see his dad's money, or really the money of the Filipino people, it's up to the U.S. The U.S. had put a freeze on that bank account. If he wanted to see any of that $300 billion, he will have to get the go ahead from the U.S. So that's a pretty big leverage that U.S. has hold over him.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. And what exactly? Okay, so I hear a lot of articles about the U.S. or not here, read a lot of articles about the U.S. wanting to quote unquote contain China. What does exactly that mean, and why would they want to do that?
Well, I mean, U.S. have been talking about containing China for a long time. I mean, since 1949, Philippines is part of what the U.S. calls First Island Chain, which stretch from the Aleutian Islands through the Japanese main islands down to Okinawa, down to Taiwan, to the Philippines, and then to Malaysia, Singapore, all the way around South China Sea. During the Cold Wars, the purpose of First Island Chain was to contain the communist power of Soviet Union and China. And now it's mostly to contain China, but also Russia. And this is a U.S. Navy has specifically said if China are somehow allowed, quote unquote, to take control of Taiwan, then the Chinese Navy will have access to the Western Pacific. Then they're breaking through the First Island Chain, and Taiwan is considered like the weakest link in the First Island Chain. And this is why U.S. have to make their stand, so to speak, in the Taiwan and in the Philippines, and to bottle China up. And this is this is just in the more simple language, U.S. want to preserve its hegemony in the Western Pacific, and the way they do it is to put like a ring of fire of military bases that stretch from Japan, Korea, Okinawa, Philippines, all to militarily contain China. When United States has a pivot to Asia strategies that started under Obama administration, under when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. And the pivot to Asia is not economic pivot. It's not about U.S. investment to Asia. It's all about military pivot. It's a pivot of U.S. military hardware, military asset, military bases away from Middle East, where U.S. had previously engaged on so-called Great War on Terror, back to East Asia because they see China as a rising power. Rise of China definitely challenges U.S. hegemony, and so they wanted to focus on contain China. This is an added bonus to that is this feeds directly into the U.S. military-industrial complex. So, for example, Taiwan is one of the best customer of the U.S. weapon systems, and they buy all these outdated but very expensive weapons that will have zero bearings on actual defense of Taiwan because they're buying stuff like Abrams tanks. What the heck? By the time
Taiwan's an island.
by the time they need Abrams tanks on Taiwan, it's already too late, right? I mean,
Yeah.
but that's not the point. The point is to feed the U.S. military-industrial complex to keep all these U.S. congressmen happy, and that's the way people on Taiwan understood it. None of the people, most people in Taiwan don't think they're actually buying actual military hardware used for Taiwan's defense. They understood it as paying off protection money. They're paying off the military industrial complex of the United States. So U.S. congressmen, U.S. politicians will then, be more favorable toward Taiwan. And this is how the grift has been played out for the last, I don't know, 70 years.
Well, one thing that's interesting about Taiwan to me is that the KMT started talking more about unification, and then the U.S. started, with the NED group, started funding the DUP party, which also has their whole host of separatists. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so, I mean, Chiang Kai-shek, he is, he's a dictator, but he's also a Chinese nationalist. So while he was a dictator on Taiwan, he suppressed the separatist sentiment on Taiwan. This whole Taiwan separatism arose is actually a reaction to the misrule of KMT on Taiwan, because even though majority of people on Taiwan they descended from families who came over from to Chinese mainland, but before 1945, most of them came from just the province across the Taiwan Strait, mostly from Fujian province and some from eastern Guangdong province. And so they speak the language of Fujian or eastern Guangdong. But after World War II, and after Japanese surrender, when Chiang Kai-shek and his army moved on to Taiwan, many people who follow Chiang Kai-shek to Taiwan, they're from all over China, not just from those two coastal provinces. China is pretty diverse. So I mean, like the Mandarin, not before 1940s, not everyone spoke Mandarin. Wasn't even popularized. So between different regions, there's a huge differences in linguistic differences. Like people from Taiwan and Fujian and say versus my home province of Sichuan, we would, without speaking standard Mandarin, we would not be able to communicate because our language is mutually unintelligible. So there's a bit of a linguistic and cultural difference between the group that came to Taiwan before 1945 and the group that came after, that came with Chiang Kai-shek. But KMT is famously corrupt. I mean, this is why they got thrown off mainland China. But they brought their corrupt rule to Taiwan as well. And this raised a lot of resentment and resistance. And what happened was when Chiang Kai-shek, during his White Terror, the period of martial law that persisted from 1947 to 1987,
30
KMT,
years.
yeah,
40 years.
yeah, KMT has basically killed off all the communist opposition, that killed all the leftist opposition. Mm-hmm. What's left, the ones that are allowed to live, are only the liberal opposition to Chiang Kai-shek. So it's this party that formed the backbone of the DPP party, which advocated platform of Taiwan independence. They see, what they see is the problem that was brought it by KMT is because Taiwan was handed over to Republic of China. So all the problem that of Chiang Kai-shek, it would be overturned if Taiwan were to be declare its independence, and that means Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government had no claims on Taiwan, and then that's the history of Taiwan separatism versus the KMT rule. But eventually, United States also started to play footsie with the Taiwan separatists because Chiang Kai-shek is a U.S. client, but he's not 100% pliable client. So what U.S. does is it keeps it stokes the Taiwan separatism as a way to keep a check on Chiang Kai-shek. So
like a carrot and a stick.
Yes. But so eventually, Chiang Kai-shek died. His son ruled Taiwan until 1988, and after he passed away, and at that time, the KMT faced a sort of crisis because they have initially the KMT identity are mostly it has a very mainland Chinese identity because most of the KMT supporters, the KMT army, they came from mainland. They dominated the government on Taiwan, but they're not the majority. The majority are the people who have family been on Taiwan before 1945. So KMT decided to KMT had tried their way to nativize the party. That's when Jiang Jingguo, the son of Chiang Kai-shek, he brought on as his vice president a guy who was born in Taiwan by the name of Li Denghui. And Li Denghui, when he became the president, he kind of flirted around idea of there's two China. There's mainland China, there's a People's Republic of China, and there's Republic of China on Taiwan. And this is something that, of course, this view from Beijing as separatism, as creating two states. And later, he flirted around with the idea, okay, if you don't recognize two China, then what about one China, one Taiwan? And he caused a huge split among the KMT. So eventually, he became more overt in his support of the Taiwan Separatist Party, which is a DPP. Then DPP finally won presidency in 2000, and one of the first thing they do is they did a desynthesization campaign in the education. So previously all the Taiwan textbook all say, we're part of China, Taiwan is part of China, and they study Chinese history, from the beginning to. So when the DPP came to power, they say, okay, we don't need to study history of China, that has nothing to do with us. We'll just make it all. The history is all going to be taught just the history of Taiwan, and then so they're trying to form a Taiwan identity that's independent from the broader Chinese identity, kind of like what they did in Ukraine after the collapse of Soviet Union.
But in Ukraine, they started glorifying the Nazi collaborators who were the scum of the earth. Like there are actually reports written by German officers talking about how brutal these Nazi collaborators are. So, I mean, it's much worse.
Yeah. Because Ukraine, they needed to find an alternative to the Soviet legacy. So the only other legacy is a Nazi.
Ukraine was 1941.
The only other legacy is a Bandera's legacy. So in Taiwan, so they try to forge a separate identity. That effort started in 1990s and intensified throughout 2000. So in 1990s, there was not even a question for most people in Taiwan, whether they're Chinese or Taiwanese. It's like, I'm both, both Taiwanese and Chinese. But now because this couple decades, more than couple decades of the whole change in the education system, they're instilling in the youth a separate identity that's from the overall Chinese identity. So that's what DPP is banking on. This is whereas KMT they're always seen as a pro mainland party because the KMT roots are from the mainland China. And when the former Taiwan president Ma Ying-jeou, who was the last KMT president, when he went to China, he went to his ancestral home. He went to worship at his ancestral tomb on the tomb sweeping day, and just to reaffirm his Chinese roots. So there's that kind of the dynamic going on between KMT and DPP. But the problem is KMT, in a way, Taiwan is very similar to the West. I mean, the divide between KMT and DPP is actually very small. Both parties are pro-business parties. Both are pro-business parties, and their difference is in like their cross-strait relations. Like KMT wants to have a more consolidatory approach with mainland China, and DPP wants to have a more standoffish a stance. But both parties depended on protection and support from Washington. This and yeah, they are kind of like this is kind of the Taiwan flavor of uniparty, on Taiwan. But the two parties, otherwise their party platform is not that dissimilar from each other. But the problem, of course, the KMT is they have failed to make their case to win the youth vote, because the DPP, through their cultivation of their youth, they are they're gaining grounds among the young voters, whereas KMT are still their core voter base are still like the older people who remember when economy was still growing on Taiwan under Chiang Kai-shek's sons Jiang Jingguo's rule. But Taiwan right now, it's facing a lot of the problem that the Western economy is facing. Taiwan have deindustrialized after 1990s because a lot of the because a lot of the Taiwan industrialists, they saw, mainland China opened up, so they move all their factory to mainland China, and the only the pillar of Taiwan's industry right now is semiconductor. It's TSMC. If you remove TSMC from Taiwan's economy, Taiwan's GDP growth will be negative, and because this is so everything is just service sectors. It's TSMC and all the services that grow up to support it, and United States right now in this confrontation with China is forcing TSMC to cut off ties with all its mainland customer base. Now, before the semiconductor ban, mainland China consisted of like 60% of the export market for TSMC, but United States like, no, you can't sell products to China anymore because we said so. I mean, this is another instance where when they talk about Taiwan independence from what? Taiwan is a U.S. client state. They can't even conduct business, without okay from the United States Commerce Department. When the Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo says, no, sorry, you can't sell semiconductor to China, they said, okay, we cut off our largest export market. And so this is the situation we have right now.
So, and the interesting part is China has been developing their own semiconductors, so Taiwan semiconductors may soon be obsolete.
Well, so right now they still have a little bit of an edge, because the way they were able to get TSMC were able to grow that pie is because in the 1970s and 1980s, Japan was the first to challenge U.S. dominant position in the semiconductor industry. So then United States government came down like a ton of bricks on the Japanese semiconductor company by raising tariffs. But because Japan they need export market, of United States. Because Japan is still, it's even though it's second largest economy, but compared to the size of U.S., it's still small. So it needs an export market. So when United States put the tariffs on Japanese semiconductors, it basically killed off the Japanese semiconductor industry. But the founder of TSMC, Morris Chan, he studied in U.S., he worked in U.S., and he made a proposal like, look, we are not gonna compete with you. What we're gonna do, is we are just gonna make the semiconductor for you. You do your semiconductor design in US, you own that intellectual property. We actually make them because the actual manufacturing of semiconductor is very capital intensive. This is something that Wall Street really hates. Wall Street hates like capital intensive investment, and it's very low margin. So Morris Chan's like no problem. But because he got the backing of the government of Taiwan, the government of Taiwan gave him full financial support by giving him loans, gave him preferential tax treatment. So he was able to run this business even though it was low margin but high volume by getting all the businesses from US, from like iPhone, for example, because their pitch is like, look, you don't want to have Samsung making your semiconductors because Samsung is your competitor. See, we don't make phones, we just make semiconductors, and so so this is why they got the iPhone contract, because they present no competition to the actual US companies. Instead, they're willing to take on the high capital intensive, low margin stuff and to grow by volume. And this is how TSMC came to monopolize like 90% of the advanced semiconductor manufacturing. But the thing is, it's not about even know-how, because a lot of the Chinese semiconductor industry, a lot of the talent originally came from TSMC. They can just lure them by paying high salaries. But semiconductor industry has a very diversified supply chain all across the globe. So TSMC, they depend on US intellectual properties, but they also depend on machines from Netherlands, from this Netherlands company called ASML, which makes DUV and EUV machines, which allow TSMC to actually make those chips. And ASML also has they also use some US intellectual property, because US designing chip, for example, you a lot of the US software, you still use US software. This is why the US have identified semiconductor as the weakest link in the Chinese supply chain, because they're like, okay, we own a lot of the intellectual properties. So if we ban, when US put a sanction, it's essentially a global sanction that says anybody that uses any like US software, US hardware that depend on US intellectual properties, you cannot do business with China. So this is why TSMC and also ASML in Netherlands, they are forced to cut off their largest market, China. China is the world's largest semiconductor market, because China is a manufacturing is a factory of the world. China make everything, and semiconductor goes into everything. It goes into not just phones, but even refrigerators.
And that's why they were accusing Russia. Was it refrigerators or micro? I forgot.
Yeah. I mean, China. What U.S. sanction has done is it forced the Chinese to rely on its domestic supply chain for semiconductors. Previously, China has no problem buying U.S. semiconductors, make their semiconductors in Taiwan, because they prefer the best of its class at the best price, and rather than go with a domestic Chinese manufacturer, because the domestic Chinese manufacturer usually lag a couple generations behind, right? So, but US cut off that option. They're like, no, you can't source Qualcomm chips. No, you cannot have your chip manufacturer in Taiwan. So it essentially forced Huawei to build the entire tech stack domestically in China, and they have to work with the Chinese semiconductor company SMIC to make their semiconductors. So now China is catching up very quickly. Huawei just launched their latest flagship phone to coincide with Janet Yellen and Blinken's visit, and the Huawei's flagship phone is made with 100% made in China components because they can't source anything from US at this point. They have to come up with their own software, their own design, their own manufacture. Actually, the fabbing, the manufacturing of the chip, and this is gonna have a huge blowback for US because China imports like 400 to 450 billion dollars worth of semiconductors, and that was continuing to grow as the Chinese economy continued to grow. And China was actually spending more money importing semiconductor than importing oil. And US suddenly said, you know what, you can't, we're not going to allow you to buy any semiconductors. And China now, this is why if you look at the trade balance between US and China, it's very funny because right now, the largest export from US to China is actually soybean, agricultural products. Soybean is the largest U.S. export to China because China is not allowed to buy any high-tech products from U.S. anymore. I mean, China would much prefer to buy high-tech products from China, but because by U.S. government action, now the largest import China from U.S. is soybeans. I mean, like now the trade balance between U.S. and China looks like that of a third world nation exporting to because United States is getting all the manufacturing goods and exporting all the raw commodities to China. Because United States is not allowed to sell high tech goods to China by the decree of U.S. government. And but what's going to happen is eventually when China becomes fully self-sufficient, that $400 billion market is going to gone forever because there's no way Chinese company will come to rely on the U.S. supply anymore because knowing that they can be cut off anytime. They'd rather go with the Chinese domestic manufacturers who may be a couple generations behind right now, but they're quickly catching up. But at least you can guarantee supply. You will not get cut off. And it's happening. It's happening right now. And I think this is why a lot of the people in U.S., a lot of the tech industry head are complaining right now. They say like the U.S. decision makers, they don't understand the business. They don't understand how things work. They're killing us. They're killing our future growth prospect by just like completely cutting them off from the Chinese market, the largest market in the world.
And how does this whole thing fit into the? I know that U.S. is going to plan some belligerence with Taiwan. Like, how is this fitting in with that?
So this is why U.S. is forcing TSMC to diversify its factories out of. So TSMC had Morris Chang rather to have all the production on Taiwan. As I mentioned, TSMC is like the mainstay of Taiwan economy, but United States is forcing TSMC to build factories in Arizona, to build factory in Germany, and Morris Chang already said, look, we can make it in US, but the product we're gonna make is gonna be it costs significantly higher than if we made in Taiwan. But US doesn't care because they are making contingency plans in case that somehow China do reunify with Taiwan, which is crazy because you would think China, you think China was just gonna cut off the trade with the outside world? I mean, China right now sells products to everybody. Why, even if China do unify with Taiwan, why would they just decide to cut off the semiconductor export. I mean, that doesn't make sense. But that's how the U.S. decision maker thinks. They think, oh, like, oh, we can't have our supply chain in the hands of China. This is why they're forcing the multinationals to quote unquote decouple, to move their supply chains out of China, to other countries like Vietnam, India, and elsewhere. And we'll see how that works out. But right now, 90% of the iPhone is still made in China. I mean, even though Apple have a very ambitious plan to build 25% of their iPhone in India by 2050, but we'll see what happens.
2050. That's
2050. Yeah. It's a long term. Their long term goal.
Very long term.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes sense. So what I noticed is, of course, the U.S. the Belt and Road Initiative is a threat to the U.S. hegemony in ways they weren't prepared. I mean, they tried to counter that with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but that was just a disaster. And so the U.S. is seeing its weakening position in the world and its inability to maintain hegemony, and now they're reacting. And how do you think they will react with regard to China in the next few years?
Well, first of all, it's not like the Belt and Road Initiative is designed in mind against United States. It's like
no, it's not that. But
this is
offer better products.
This is completely in the head of the U.S. elite. They think it in the zero sum. Your loss is my gain. When the China built ports, any country can use that ports. It sits on the ocean. It increased global connectivity. But this is not how United States think. United States they cannot comprehend a deal could be win-win. It's only zero sum game for these people. And why wouldn't United States cooperate with China? Maybe we'll actually have high-speed rail in California. But no, we can't have that. but we can't have that. The thing is that, like Putin said in his Tucker Carlson interview, he said it's a problem with this hegemony mindset. As long as the U.S. elite don't get rid of their hegemony mindset, nothing is going to change. It doesn't matter whether Biden or Trump is in office. Who become president is immaterial. It's their mindset needs to change. But this is the problem. They see the rise of China doesn't have to be in opposition with the United States. But this is how people in Congress, how people in Washington see it.
Well, I do have one point. For example, the U.S. had a contract with Senegal to build some things. After 14 years, nothing happened. China came in and finished and had a deal to build roads, some buildings, some ports, and boom, within 5 years, everything was done. So the U.S. was not actually developing or fulfilling their projects as they agreed upon, and China did. So China is offering a better deal for most countries.
Yes, and by it's not like United States can work with China. Like, for example, the TikTok ban, right? I mean, this is the whole thing about TikTok ban is really like TikTok is eating lunch of Facebook and Google because U.S. companies can't compete, so they want to kill their competitor. So they're using this excuse of the national security surveillance app, whatever.
Well, the thing about it is that there's also another issue with TikTok is that it seems like the U.S. can't control its domestic propaganda as easily. For example, there's so many videos of Israeli atrocities being shown, and so I think that adds to it too.
Yeah, I mean that's also another factor, and the thing is, like, look at what recently happened in China. Elon Musk just traveled to China. Previously, there were some issues with Tesla because Chinese government was concerned that the Tesla dash cam could capture information around sensitive sites, so they had a certain Chinese government agency to ban driving Tesla to those government sites. So they work out a deal where Tesla is going to work with Baidu on like automation, driverless cars. And so basically Baidu will be the one who's be supplying the data to Tesla. This way, it puts the Chinese government minds at ease. So all the data collected is going to stay in China. It will be under Baidu. But Tesla still gets to sell to the Chinese market, still gets to make money by staying in China, and the Chinese government just lift the ban on government, the purchase by government employee of Tesla cars. So this is a win-win situation. I mean, they find a way that profit both sides. But United States approach on TikTok is like, no, we either ban it or you have to sell TikTok to us. You have to sell not only the company, but you have to sell your core technology, which is an AI recommendation engine. You have to sell that to us. I mean, talking about IP theft. I mean, that's.
Hold on 1 second. Let me change the battery.
Okay.
Exactly, and no more free market.
Yeah, I mean, free market was only good when U.S. companies were making the killings overseas, and now they can't. They find that they can't compete with China. Suddenly, okay, now we need tariffs. We need. Elon Musk said, without tariffs, the Chinese EV makers are going to kill all the traditional car makers in U.S.
Well, I noticed Chinese EVs are being sold all over Latin America and also being manufactured in Brazil and Bolivia. And so, yeah, it seems like they probably can't compete.
Yeah, I mean, like if you look at the Chinese videos are coming out of Chinese EV factory, they're fully automated. They have like robots making the cars 24/7. In US, you still have people bolting the doors on the car. I mean, how could you compete with that? But again, this is domestic U.S. agenda. I mean, it's understandable that U.S. want to protect its domestic industry, but they could just say it. Just raise tariffs, okay. But instead, they're using bogus reason like, oh, because the Chinese cars are loaded with surveillance apps. Gonna like. That's silly.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that it also exposes the unfairness. For example, the U.S. has been a leading advocate of the WTO. That, like, for example, a while back, there's like a meat waste called turkey tails that they sell to Samoa, which is very unhealthy. And when Samoa wanted to ban it, the WTO stepped in and said, you can't ban it. Free market, free market. So they've built up these international organizations like the WTO that kind of forces their products into other countries, but then they don't want to abide by those same rules.
Yeah, I mean, like Putin says, rule-based international order. Who makes those rules? What are those rules? Who make those rules? But this is Washington's way of saying it's my way or the highway, and this is demonstrated by the whole Blinken trip to China. He's not even offering the Chinese anything. Instead, he's saying, okay, well, if you don't do what we say, if you don't cut off ties with Russia, we're going to sanction you. That's cray-cray. I mean, can you imagine if when U.S. took Russia off the SWIFT system, that really got the de-dollarization ball rolling. But the moment they're going to sanction Chinese banks, I mean, the moment China goes off the dollar, I mean, there's gonna be an avalanche of de-dollarization. You're talking about one of the world's largest economies suddenly says, okay, well, I guess we can't do dollar anymore because we got cut off. So everybody gonna have to trade in RMB right now. That's gonna send financial shocks all over the world. This is right now. even if people like Blinken, even if their goal is to preserve U.S. hegemony, you gotta be smart about it. Right now, they're all the problems U.S. empire faced at this point is like 99% self-inflicted.
You're absolutely right. And I'm also wondering, like, are they going to sanction, like, what's going to happen to toilet paper? Because, like, literally, like, toilet, everything is made in China. So it's more going to be a self-sanction if they're going to sanction China.
Yeah, I mean, indeed. But the people, I don't know, like the people, they're so cut off. I think that the Beltway bubble is real. They're completely cut off from the reality. They're cut off from the reality of everyday average Americans, and they're cut off from um, the reality of supply chain and manufacturing because United States don't have manufacturing anymore, so they don't understand how advanced manufacturing works. And and what you have is a bunch of lawyers, bunch of making all the rules, and yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, and to me, that's what's like surprise. But what was interesting about Blinken's trip to China is when he saw all this technology, and his eyes looked very impressed with like the QR code payment and things like that.
it's like yeah. I mean, in many ways, I think China is already in the 21st century, but U.S. is still stuck in the 20th century. But many people in the U.S. just don't realize that yet.
Oh yeah, they don't. And exactly, and they don't realize how even within the past 20 years, like the U.S. doesn't have the same capacity to destroy a country like it did with Iraq now. So it can't. It doesn't have the same. The military doesn't have the same might, and so forth and so on. And so it seems like they are living in the past.
Well, this is why they're relying on financial sanction more and more because it's you know this is one of the last leg of the U.S. empire. I call the three pillars of U.S. empire: military, finance, and tech. And the tech and the military legs are kind of wobbly at this point because Yemen is now a world naval power. They are directing 12% of the world shipping, while the U.S. admiral was saying we are engaged in the biggest battle U.S. Navy has engaged in since World War II. And what was the result? The result is like U.S. is impotent to break through the blockade in the Red Sea, and then so now they're increasingly relying on weaponizing U.S. dominance in the financial sector, but this is gonna backfire really badly because once the dollar goes, once the dollar goes as a world reserve currency, everything goes. There's nothing going to be able to support the military and the tech once the dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency, and the U.S. government's policy is now driving is the most important force driving de-dollarization throughout the world at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the way it sanctioned Venezuela, Russia, Iran, people are like, they understand how futile it is to let them have control of it. So many countries are diversifying their reserves.
Yeah, I mean, this is why China, this is why China stopped trying to reduce their exposure to the U.S. Treasury. Previously, because China run a large trade plus with United States, all the extra dollars they get, they cycle it back into the U.S. Treasury, so which helps to stabilize the interest rate in U.S., allows U.S. consumers to buy more made in China products. But eventually, China figured out, okay, we're just getting a bunch of paper IOU over here. It's much better if we invest it elsewhere. In like Belt and Road project. I mean, this is why Janet Yellen went to Beijing twice because United States started noticing, hey, China just reduced their treasury holding from 1.4 trillion to like 800 billion. We don't like where the trend. We don't like where this trend is going, and but that's gonna be the future. Is China gonna they realize it's not wise to hitch their economic future to the dollar, because now U.S. is likely to weaponize that even more.
So in that case, I have another question. Why aren't they being more aggressive with the de-dollarization?
Well, okay, so previously people used dollar because, well, it's convenient because it's a reserve currency, so it's accepted everywhere. The dollar that U.S. the China acquires through its trade surplus, not only they can come buy products from U.S., but they can also use to buy products from the rest of the world. They can use it to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, from the Gulf countries, and but now United States is is making dollar a liability rather than an asset. So it takes time. It takes time to unwind your dollar holdings. China still have $800 billion worth of U.S. Treasuries, and then they also even a lot of the Belt and Road project currently they're being financed by dollars. They're dollar projects. So it's gonna take time to unwind that. So I mean the direction we're definitely moving towards the direction of de-dollarization. You have the BRICS coming up with the BRICS reserve currency, but it will take time for them to replace dollar role completely. So I mean, I don't expect this to happen overnight, but more like 10, 15, 20 years down the road.
That makes a lot of sense. And so, before we go, can you please tell people where they can find you and what you're planning on doing in the recent future?
Well, I am a prolific ship poster online. People can find me on Twitter or X. My account is just Carl Za. I also have a YouTube channel, Carl Za, where I talk about issues related to China, politics, history, politics, and culture. I run my own podcast, Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China, history, politics, and culture on the Patreon website. Where I'm also doing a chronological retelling of Chinese history from the very beginning.
A what?
Yes, from the very beginning. Now I'm up to 530 BC. So
Wow, so you already went through about 3,000 years of history.
yeah, I already covered like quite a bit, but I still have 2,500 years to go. So I'm taking my time. It's a long-term project. Long-term project. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for joining us in such short notice. So this is going to come out on Saturday, and thanks again.